I opened it to the wind one, so that would be at
I'm having a play game with
Yeah, I don't want to say Hi. Hello.
Don't lean down and just say a few words.
Okay.
Hello.
Testing.
Yeah. She's married to a classmate.
Wait, should I try like
Yeah.
I'm gonna try like. Is it better? Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
You changed the lever setting.
Oh,
God, there you go.
I don't know what it is.
That's okay.
Okay. What is it?
Mark and I were classmates in college.
Move it closer.
Fine, just project really loud.
Can you hear me?
He did.
Here, you can have the mic more because I can be pretty loud.
As I said, that was an experience that I could, so we could hear it.
Somebody in similar way.
Well, yeah, those kids.
Should be okay. Let's put it really close together.
Can you hear me?
Yeah?
Can you hear us?
Really? They're not really designed for this.
Does it work? Okay, whatever. We can just do that.
It's actually very fun.
Got it.
I think we're going to be okay. Talking about the weather. Let's do one more test in about 10 seconds.
It's really humid.
Testing.
It's way too humid. It's bad.
Talking about the weather.
This isn't working.
I don't think you can.
I don't think you can hear us. I'll just project.
I've seen this one.
Okay, talking about the weather for about a second.
Beautiful weather.
Yes, good weather. Good weather.
Also, ladies, just remind you to look up.
Keep talking. Just count to 10.
Okay.
It's too hard to talk about the weather. Give me about 10 seconds of counting to 10. How about that?
1,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Done. We're good. Thank you.
Okay.
Maybe.
Hi, my name is Miriam.
My name is Jenny.
My name is Amira. My name is Panina, and we are the YULA Girls High School bait team. To begin our decision, as in any case involving damages, we must define the item that caused damage. In our case, the Aliva self-driving car, as one of the four avot mentioned in Bava Kama, Perak Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, the shore, bore, mava, or heather. We can rule out the bore or pit, because a pit is stationary while a car is not. The mava has a disputed definition debated between Rav, Shmuel, and Rav Miri, but none of which are relevant to a car. This leaves the shore and the heather.
Although things that cause damage are usually categorized as only one of these, the Beitin has found that since its invention is very unique, we can go with unique interpretation as necessary in this case. The car is like an ox because it is a mode of transportation with a mind separate from the person riding it. However, a key difference that differentiates it from an ox is that a car is not alive, a crucial difference mentioned later in the source. Therefore, we have also categorized the car as heather or fire. The car must be turned on just as the fire must be ignited by someone. And since the car has no manual override option, the rider does not have meaningful control over it, similarly to one who ignites a fire.
Mr. Levine is not liable for the damages caused to Mr. Shalom. The Torah places such a high value on life that it is imperative that the car is designed in order to maximize life. Vayikra Perek Yud Tet Pasuk Tet Zayin states, Lo ta'amod al dam re'acha. Do not stand idly by in the blood of your peer. This pasuk introduces the idea of pikuach nefesh, which refers to the need to take the necessary precautions to save a life. Furthermore, we learn from Ketubot 19a and the Novelei of Ramban that the only actions that can stand in the way of saving a life are the three cardinal sins: sexual immorality, idolatry, and murder. This proves that the Torah cares so much about preserving life that only the three most terrible sins can prevent a person from saving a life. Mr. Levine programmed his car to make sure it would not kill another person, the exact course of action that he should halachically pursue.
By swerving away from the pedestrian, Mr. Levine's program performed the necessary actions to save a life. Even if Ms. Rubenstein's car had been a regular car, it would have been better for her to damage Mr. Shalom's car and injure him than to kill the pedestrian. In addition, Talmud Sanhedrin 37a states that whoever saves a life, it is ke'ilu kayem olam maleh. It's as if he saved the entire world. So not only did Mr. Levine not commit a sin, the Torah would define him as a man who saved the entire world.
Additionally, Bava Kama Perak Dalad Mishnah Dalad says, a stadium ox trained to kill is not liable to be executed, since the Torah states if an ox scores, and not that it was caused to gore by others. Our case is the opposite of this, because the car, which is the ox in this scenario, was trained not to kill.
So, if an ox trained to kill is not held liable, then kal v'chomer, an ox not trained to kill cannot be held liable either. Since the trainers in our case are Mr. Levine's employees who programmed the car, he is absolved of any liability.
To also vote Bava comma 60B Ashima who asks, is it permitted to save oneself by destroying another's property? He asks if one is obligated to pay for the damage when one saves oneself because of pikuach nefesh. The answer provided by Bava comma 60B can then be interpreted to mean that one must pay for damages he caused to another's property in order to save himself. One might think that this source would obligate Mr. Levine to pay for the damages caused by the car. However, after further analysis, we see that this is not the case. Mr. Levine was not saving himself by destroying Mr. Shalom's property. Rather, he was saving an innocent pedestrian, and therefore this source is not applicable to our case.
Ms. Rubenstein is undoubtedly liable in this case, despite her inability to stop the car. Rabbeinu Asher states that riders have the responsibility of ensuring that they can stop their animal or mode of travel at will, and that the damager is liable to pay if they have not taken the necessary precautions. Ms. Rubenstein knew that the car had no manual override, yet decided to buy it anyways. She did not fulfill her obligation and was negligent in ensuring the safety of herself and others, since she did not make sure her vehicle had a brake, and therefore she is fully liable to pay.
According to Shemot, Perek Chaf Bet, Pasuk Hey, when a fire burns down a field, he who started the fire must make restitution. In this situation, the one who set the fire, Ms. Rubenstein, did not intend for it to harm others. However, according to Bava Kama 2:6, someone who causes damage that's unintentional has the same liability as someone who caused it intentionally. Ms. Rubenstein started the fire in this case because she is the one who turned on the ignition of the car. Mr. Levine did not go to Ms. Rubenstein's house and turn on the car for her. It was by her hand that Mr. Shalom was harmed, and therefore she is fully liable to make restitution.
Mr. Levine is not liable from these sources, even though he is the creator of the car. When someone starts a fire with a match, no one would even think of suing the matchbox company, and so too in this case. The liability is solely in the one who started the fire. Also, Mr. Levine's car acted in the right as it prioritized life, and either way, Ms. Rubenstein knew that she would not be able to make the car do otherwise when she bought it, making her negligent in buying it and fully responsible for the damages.
Bava Kama Perek Bet Mishnah Vav also states that a person is always considered liable whether awake or asleep. Even though Ms. Rubenstein could be considered asleep by her inability to stop the car, which we have already discussed is a result of her negligence rather than Mr. Levine's fault, that has no effect on her liability.
To address the question of whether or not Mr. Levine should change the programming of Aliva's car, the answer is no. His car clearly had to have passed federal regulations for it to be on the market in the first place. However, Lifnei Meshurat Hadin, we suggest that he add a manual override option, so that if his buyers are Jewish, as in our case, they will not be committing a sin by acting negligent and taking this car into a public domain, such as a street. It's similar to the situation of a Jew selling pork in a marketplace. Technically, this is allowed, but it's not necessarily the best situation in case his buyers are Jewish, as in our scenario. Therefore, we do not require that Mr. Levine change the programming of his car, but we do suggest that he do so.
Since we have found Ms. Rubenstein liable, we will discuss the specifics of what she must pay Mr. Shalom. Ms. Rubenstein must pay for all of Mr. Shalom's damages. According to Shemot, Perek Kaf Aleph, Pasuk Kaf Daled, Ms. Rubenstein must pay an eye for an eye, meaning that she needs to reimburse all of Mr. Shalom's financial losses according to the interpretation of this pasuk in Bava Kama 83b. Specifically, all of Mr. Shalom's medical expenses must be covered because of Shemot, Perek Kaf Aleph, Pasuk Yotet, which states, "He shall cause him to be thoroughly healed." This means that anyone who harms another person must pay all medical expenses. So Ms. Rubenstein, the liable party, must pay for all of Mr. Shalom's medical expenses.
One whose ox causes damage only has to pay for damages, one of the 5 categories of payments that one who causes harm has to pay for, according to Bava Kama Perek Chaf Mishnah Aleph. One might think that since we have categorized the car as shore, Ms. Rubenstein only has to pay for damages as necessary with the ox. However, as we have also categorized the car as haver, the liable party must pay for more than just that. One who causes damage by fire has to pay for all categories of payments listed, because of Bava Kama 22ab, which states, "Fire and arrows are comparable, and arrows are an extension of oneself. Therefore, fire is an extension of oneself as well."
This source states that arrows are to people as fire is to arrows. So therefore, fire is comparable to people. People are liable for all categories of payment when they cause harm. So this makes one who starts a fire responsible for all 5 types of payment listed in Bava Kama Perek Chaf Mishnah Aleph: damages, suffering, medical expenses, time off of work, and embarrassment, rather than only having to pay for damages.
We hope that all the parties involved gain insight from our ruling, and we wish them the best in their time of need.
Judges, you have 8 minutes.
So the first obvious question to me is, if we could have gotten this jaywalker, what would the owner of the car's responsibility be in that case?
Okay, so we have two responses to that. First of all, the pedestrian is considered, as the Rambam states, in the cases of onus, when there is even an uncommon gust of wind, such as one as strong as the wind of Eliyahu, which could be anything like as much as a hurricane, you are still liable for these damages even though they're unintentional. And in addition, this is a case between Mr. Shalom and Ms. Rubenstein. So we cannot hold someone liable since they are not the one being sued. If Ms. Rubenstein finds issue with our ruling and she wants compensation from the pedestrian and she is able to find him, then she can sue him and take him to another Beit Din.
So if she was, though, if we had this jaywalker available to us, you're saying that this jaywalker is analogous to a sudden gust of wind?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than an individual who has the ability to make choices?
Even though he had the ability to make a choice, it was Ms. Rubenstein's car that had to act in this situation, and she should have been more responsible in thinking ahead for any of the most uncommon situations.
But in that case, she wouldn't be driving the car because the car didn't have an override potential.
Yes, but she is still the one who started the fire by turning on the car.
So the decision would have been to either drive or not drive, and if you're driving a vehicle, then to take on that responsibility. I totally hear that. In that case, then the other person driving a car, what responsibility does he have? He's also driving a vehicle that puts him at risk.
Yes, but he is driving a vehicle that he can stop at will. And according to the response of Rabbeinu Asher, you're only not allowed to be driving one of these sorts of transportation methods if you can't stop at will. And Ms. Rubenstein could not stop at will since there was no manual override option.
I see. So the decision to drive a vehicle that didn't have a manual override option is really the at fault.
Exactly.
It makes her negligent.
I see. And so even if the jaywalker who clearly violated the law, I don't agree with the analogizing the jaywalker to something that has no rules of to follow or not follow. That's the part I'm a little bit concerned about. So if this jaywalker were available to us, that person would still not be liable in any way?
No, but if you still would find issue with that ruling, then since this is not a case between the pedestrian and Mr. Shalom, then you can have a separate case with a separate Beit Din.
I see. So if the cause of the accident is not available, then the person who is there.
Well, it has to do with the fact that, like, if you think about it in simple terms, like in terms of our law, if you have 3 cars and, the first one stops short and then there's 2 after that hit each other because of that, what happens is the third car and the second car have to deal with each other in a court, and the third car is the one that hit the second car, so he's liable. And in that case,
somewhat liable.
And then in that case, okay, fine, he's liable, but what about the first car? Then after that case is done, now he has to take his liability and go against that first car.
I see.
So let me see if I understand this, and it's going to be a question I posed previously. So let's assume for the moment that the accident takes place, Ms. Rubenstein sees what has taken place, has a heart attack, and dies. Okay? So she's no longer available. Does that mean that Mr. Levine is now liable because he's the only one that's left?
No.
Okay.
She's still liable because she's still.
But she's dead.
It doesn't matter if she's dead. She can still be liable.
So you're saying that the fact that whether she's here or she's not, she's liable.
Right.
The responsibility can then also be passed on to family
So now let's assume for the
members
moment let's assume for the moment that we have both of the people in the dock. We have the pedestrian and we have Ms. Rubenstein, who's responsible.
Did you say that they're responsible or that they're here?
Who's liable? In other words, we found the pedestrian, they are both here. Who's responsible?
Ms. Rubenstein, because she's still the one who started the fire and took this car into the public domain, even though she was not allowed to.
So let me see if I understand. You're saying that there is no such thing as an intervening cause for damage?
We're not saying that there's...
In other words, I can start an action, but if there's an intervening cause that in fact alters the direction of the car, that my action to change the direction of the car has no significance at all?
We're going with the opinion of the Ramban that you have to be cautious of the most far-fetched type of onus, and this car was not it couldn't deal with that, and it was her fault for taking it to the street.
I want to come back to that in a moment, because one of the things that you also talked about, and a number of presentations have talked about, is Adam Muad La'olam, and the fact that the person is always responsible. I had understood that to be that you have to take some action that causes the damage, and that there has to be some proximate cause to the damage. In other words, it's not just simply that because I'm there, but there has to be some relationship between the action and the damage. What's the relationship between the action and the damage?
Well, Ms. Rubenstein said herself that she would have acted differently, and we don't know for sure that that would have saved the pedestrian. So since the programming of Mr. Levine's car acted in the right and avoided killing the pedestrian, it's as if he saved him.
Let me switch to two other areas. The first one is, while I understand the notion that there is pikuach nefesh on behalf of Aliva, why isn't there still liability? Because even though there's pikuach nefesh, nonetheless, the creation of the car, since you say it is a negligent object in and of itself, because of the fact that she bought it without a manual override, that means it was created without a manual override, which means that the manufacturer was also negligent.
It's similar to the case of someone selling pork. While it's not ideal to be selling pork to a Jew, it's still technically permissible. So that's why we advise that they add a manual override, even though we do not require it.
But isn't it negligent? Because if you're saying that she is negligent in purchasing a car that has a defect in it, isn't it also negligent to create a car with a defect in it?
The car does not have a defect in it because it would be perfectly fine if a non-Jew was driving it, because a non-Jew does not have to follow halacha, obviously. And so this market, the market that Aliva Industries is advertising to, is not solely Jewish.
That's certainly true, but wouldn't there be civil liability and tort, whether you were under halakha or otherwise?
Well, it had to have passed any regulations for it to be on the market to begin with.
That doesn't mean that you can't be still liable for negligent design. It can be on the market and still be subject to that. Let me move to one last area, and that is, I'm a little puzzled by the notion that you say that there's 5 forms of damage or 5 types of compensation. Doesn't that require direct physical action as opposed to just turning on a car, which is really not the direct physical action? In other words, if you take a look at the Mishnah in Bava Kama, that's what it's talking about, acholu b'chavero. So how do you get to the fact that there's 5 forms of compensation due?
So first of all, there was the what we said before about comparing 5. I finished my sentence.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Well, please, everybody, congratulations to all the teams for the presentations. Also, another round of applause for them, as well as a round of applause for our judges. Thank you for your time. Everybody is asked to leave the room. You can convene in the Sam Houston room at 12:15. In the interim, the judges will be deliberating the decision, so everybody is asked to convene once again.
I'm sorry, which one?
I think movie theaters, I think we have
That's viewed as a direct action. The problem you've got here with all of this is it's not a direct action, and that's the issue that everyone's struggling with. Good job. So, thank you.
Did you receive your extra sheets?
Oh, no, I don't, she just said, yeah, I'm going to just do it on. These are, I don't know if this is. All right.